tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Wanted to turn to an issue that is near and dear to a lot of those of you watching and listening to this, and that is what your child is learning in the classroom, and more importantly, how effectively they are learning. Now, I had it easy because I think the only handheld device that I had to contend with when I was of school age was, I think, a Tamagotchi, which at one point was like beeping up a storm in the classroom. So the teacher just took it and put it in her desk. And I don't even think I ever saw it again, to be honest. So that Tamagotchi is probably long since died by now. Or maybe it's just, living up the life in my teacher's retirement. But now kids have everything. They have like their iPhones, their iPads, their all of these different devices. I was going to name other devices, and then I realized I don't know any more devices now because iPods aren't a thing. I think they've just been replaced by the iPhone, basically. But the Ontario government has tried to do something about this. They've come up with a policy that effectively keeps devices out of the classroom up to a certain point and then says from grade 7 and up, I think it is, that with teacher permission, they can be used. Some people are welcoming this, but others are saying it does not go far enough. Joining me is Paige MacPherson, the Associate Director of Education Policy for the Fraser Institute. Paige, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk first off about the why here, because I think there are some people that just take an anti-distraction and anti-tech view, and they don't want kids on their phones in class. But the data actually support this as being a fairly significant thing when it comes to educational achievement and performance, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have really interesting and valuable PISA data. So that's the Program for International Student Assessment from the OECD. That looks, probably most people know that as the sort of gold standard international test of 15-year-olds that is done. So PISA has great student performance data in math, reading, and science, but they also have an insights report that has data on a whole bunch of different things. And they looked at smartphones and digital distractions in classrooms in their most recent report. And what it found is that there's actually a measurable impact on math scores in particular when it comes to digital distraction in classrooms. So that's from people either being distracted by their own devices or people being distracted by the devices of people in the classroom around them. And that's really informative for when it comes to crafting smartphone ban policies in classrooms, because it means that it's not just what one student has on their own desk that matters to have an actual measurable impact on their math scores. And other research has shown really their cognitive development or that they're actually cognitively impairing to have this digital distraction going on. But it actually matters what other students in the classroom have as well.
Now, I don't know at what age kids are getting phones. I'm assuming there's a bit of a range here, but the policy really, I think, where it's relevant is from 7 to 12. So grade 7 to 12, not age. And that's where the teacher can say, okay, if maybe you want to have your phone, that's fine. Or the teacher could say no. I feel bad for teachers here because now all of a sudden they're the bad guys and they're the ones that have to enforce this. And if you've got some 16-year-old boy or girl that doesn't want to put their phone down, even if the teacher has said no, that's really the end of it here. So the enforcement, I think, will be a huge problem here. And it's, again, another thing teachers have to deal with.
I totally agree with you. I think this is one of the flaws in the policy that Doug Ford's government has put forward that you pointed out, is that there's a much more uniform, strict ban in the younger grades. And where, yeah, we do know that kids are starting to get smartphones in grade 3, 4, 5, which might come as a shock to some parents. My oldest kid is 6, and I can't believe that this is a reality. It's almost around the corner. But this is true. But the likelihood of that kid bringing their smartphone to school and being distracted by it during the day, it exists, but it's a lot lower. Whereas we know that the stats on smartphone ownership in high school are through the roof. Almost all teenagers have these devices, and they're the ones who are much more likely to be glued to their devices throughout the day. So having a policy that is the most uniform as possible and really as strict as possible when it comes to just removing the digital distraction from teenagers in particular and middle schoolers as well, where there's middle schools in Ontario, that is something that, I think that's a big flaw in the policy. And the other thing as well is that, so the 2019 smartphone smartphone so-called ban, which wasn't really a ban, that the Ontario government had in place, left it up to school boards. This new policy, which I still will not call a ban, is leaves it up to teachers' discretion, which, as you say, makes teachers the bad guys. Teachers need to know that, yeah, they can be the bad guys sometime, and discipline in classrooms is really important, and teachers maintaining, calm control over their classroom. We know from the research this is a really important thing for great student outcomes. But teachers also need to know that they're supported by their administration, principals, school boards, and the provincial government, so that they can say to kids, look, this is the policy, it is what it is, with very few exceptions. Like, for example, kids that need to check for medical reasons, if they're monitoring their blood sugar, they need their cell phone to help in that. Okay, there's going to be some exceptions, but as uniform and blanket as the ban can be, so that it takes it out of teachers' hands, stops teachers from surveilling and nagging throughout the day, I think the better the policy will look.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and this is when we talk about school as a preparatory influence for the real world, is that the real world is one in which people are surrounded by phones, and phones are a part of everyday life. In the same way that I think the negativity surrounding calculators has sort of gone away, because most of us in life, and again, probably wrongfully so, but most of us in life will never need to, memorize our multiplication tables or whatever. But is there not something to the argument that we should be using technology as an educational tool in the classroom? Because that's the counter I've heard to this, is that, well, no, it's not realistic to, have this technologically sterile environment. So let's just make sure that we're leveraging this and using the advantages of these devices for learning.
That is definitely one of the most prominent counter arguments. What I would say to that is that school is for two things. School is for preparing students for the world in terms of their learning and their academic achievement. Students need to go to school to learn. We know that once a student is distracted by a smartphone, it can take, one research study showed, 20 minutes to regain focus. A full 20 minutes. That's an entire lesson in some cases, just after one distraction.
Just to drill into that point. So if I, look at my phone for a second and look away, I would assume that the distraction has now ended, that I'm back. But you're saying with kids, that's actually not the case at all.
Kids don't have the same amount of brain development that has happened that adults have. They don't have the same prefrontal cortex development that controls impulse. So they aren't able, if you feel your phone buzzing in your pocket, you might say, you know what, I'm going to get to that later because I'm working on something. And we know as adults, it's really difficult for us as well. But for kids, it's so much more difficult because they just don't have that impulse control. They don't have that same level of brain development that we have as adults, which makes smartphones in general really problematic for a lot of kids and teenagers. But certainly when it comes to focus, there are big impacts. And there's been a lot of work and research in psychology that has been done on this exact topic. Jonathan Haidt's book is a really great resource on this. He's a psychologist that has written about this. Recently, he calls for a ban of smartphones in schools. It says that they should be put into a lockable pouch or a locker for the school day. The reason being that kids just don't have that level of impulse control. But the other thing that I would add is that school, yes, for learning, that's the primary purpose of school. It's not just to prepare kids for the modern world or whatever the sort of rhetoric around that will be. It's also for genuine socialization, right? It's for kids to be able to do things face to face, to interact with their teachers, interact with their peers face to face. When you put away the digital devices that are in front of kids' faces and distracting them throughout the day, you're going to have more of that genuine face to face socialization, which I also think is quite important for kids in many, many real world contexts, socially, but also professionally.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because I've seen some people argue, and I've got a bigger issue with this, but I certainly understand the argument of banning them at all points in the school day. So even in the lunchroom, you shouldn't be able to have your phone out. And that's really one of the reasons when you talk about socialization there, is that the whole point is that you have a time in your life in which you're all in the same room, you can all get together, you can all talk and have fun and laugh. And I suspect if you walk into most lunchrooms now that everyone is just glued to their phones.
Absolutely. So if you ask my personal opinion on it, I think that phones should be banned throughout the day. Most of the experts who are out there on this topic agree that the ban should be throughout the day for those socialization aspects, but also because we know that phones, and some of the PISA data actually speaks to this as well. The 8 in 10 kids in Canada say that they're anxious when their smartphone is not with them at all times in the day. We need to break that cycle. That's actually higher than the OECD average, which is closer to 60% of kids. We also know from that data, again, that kids are distracted by their own devices, yes, but they're also distracted by others' devices as well. So if kids are thinking about the next moment that they're going to get to their smartphone, thinking about the next moment that the person beside them is going to get to their smartphone, if kids in schools they're taking videos of one another, they're showing each other things on their phones. If you think, okay, my kid has pretty good self-discipline, that's one thing, but the ability for them to be distracted by other kids is really significant as well. And parents play a role in this too, right? A lot of parents want to be able to get in touch with their kids at all times during the day. And this is a situation wherein I do think provincial governments need to show leadership. I believe that parental involvement in schools, providing consent, being informed if they want to be about what their kids are learning in school, offering feedback on that. There's good research to show that that's really important for beneficial student outcomes, student achievement being stronger as well. But parents will need to get on board with a policy that they know that if there is a true emergency, they can call the office and not get in touch with their kids throughout the day. So there are stumbling blocks beyond just that one child and their smartphone and how much they're using it throughout the day. There's a digital distraction that is so much larger than that in classrooms. If we allow the sort of, okay, well, you can have your smartphone now, you can get it back, and then you give it back, and then this throughout the day. There's logistics that have to be worked out when you think about things like lockable pouches. Some of your viewers might have gone to a concert or a comedy show where they had to put in a lockable pouch because the show was being recorded for a streaming service. They probably enjoyed the show a lot more because they didn't have distractions, and then they got their phone back from that lockable pouch from security at the end of the concert. Teachers can employ that, or schools, and you can do that with cell phone lockers as well. It does become a little bit logistically tricky when you think about high school students moving from class to class, but independent schools across North America, there are examples of schools that have done this with quite large student populations. It's very doable. And I think the benefits of having focus from kids during classroom time so far outweigh the costs.
Well, you and I are the same age, and I recall maybe on 2 or 3 occasions in the entirety that I went to school where something was so urgent that my mother needed to call the school and have the office page the classroom and have the teacher send me to it's not that common in most cases that you're going to need that, but there was a process available. And, maybe it took, 4 minutes longer than, just texting me would have. But I also wonder how much, and you may have, I know it gets outside of the educational policy realm, but as a parent, you might have thoughts on this. The idea that parents might be more of the problem than kids in some of these cases, that, parents are the ones that are in that emergency mindset. I mean, the kids may want their phones for other reason, but that emergency need for contact argument, I just don't think is really as real as some parents might make it out to be.
Yeah, there is, it's sort of a byproduct of our modern world, this sort of safetyism culture that we need to be able to monitor kids 24/7. It is certainly prevalent. And I do think that, when it comes to policies like this, you do need to have people, the policies need to be thoroughly explained to parents. They are a critically important stakeholder in education, but ultimately schools ban certain things that we know are negative for kids. There are going to be some, like I said, exceptions for medical reasons and whatnot. But this is not something that school is for, right? School is not to be distracted by their smartphones all day. And if parents can sort of come to understand that the improved cognitive abilities of their kids during the school day, the reduced anxiety, the increased genuine socialization, the increased ability for teachers to maintain control over their classrooms, reduce the nagging, reduce the surveilling that they're having to spend so much classroom time on. We know that parents are, in many cases, dissatisfied with falling student performance results as well. These are important outcomes for kids to ensure that they have bright futures and to ensure brighter futures for our provinces. So ultimately, knowing that smartphones in classrooms distracting kids are a significant component of this problem, and knowing as well that, we've got big fish to fry when it comes to education policy, but this is one that is pretty easily solvable with a simple, elegant, not very expensive policy solution that we already have at our fingertips. We just need courage from provincial governments to implement this policy. So yes, parents are going to need to come on board. We have to push back against that safetyism culture just a little bit when it comes to this, but knowing that that parents can get in touch with their students if needed, perhaps keeping in mind that a consistent engagement between schools and parents, so parents can feel very involved in that process. That's an important component of education too. But everybody kind of acknowledging that this is an issue that we can very easily solve, because all of our kids deserve an environment in their classrooms that is free of digital distraction.
No, very well said. And it was part of the fun too. The announcement comes and calls someone to the office. Everyone else in the classroom gets to go, oh. It was part of the fun. Why rob your children of that potential public shaming or whatever? Anyway, all right, Paige MacPherson, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, I like that you've highlighted that we lived in the golden era of Tamagotchis and public shaming over the announcement.
Yes, my Tamagotchi, I think, lived like 14 days. It was like my first experience at loss and heartbreak, I think. But anyway, set me up well for the future.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.